The great resignation was meant to be a post pandemic phenomenon of the corporate world. But the Congress is battling a great resignation of its own. I'm Barkha Dutt here with the Mojo Story, and today we are looking at the exodus of leaders, young and old. In 2 days, the Congress has lost one of its youngest leaders, but also one of its veterans, Ghulam Nabi Azad, who, in his walkout and farewell, made a case to go for the jugular, calling Rahul Gandhi non-serious and glaringly immature. The Congress lashed back and questioned the electoral winnability of Azad, basically saying, "Jana hai to jaiye." But the Congress seems to be in denial of the crisis within. And now more and more leaders of the group that has come to be known as the G23 are speaking out. Among them, Manish Tewari, who you see on your screen. Manish Tewari, of course, has been union minister. He has been somebody who was part of the group that signed that letter urging for a reform within the Congress. And as we begin speaking to him, on the right side of your screen, you see images of the several leaders, many of them Manish's friends, colleagues, who have walked out of the party actually just in the last few months. And this is only perhaps the beginning. Mr. Tewari made a very intriguing statement this morning to news agency ANI saying, जो लोग कांग्रेस लीडर्स की चपरासी हुआ करते थे वो आज पार्टी को ज्ञान दे रहे हैं, जो वार्ड इलेक्शन भी नहीं जीत सकते वो आज पार्टी को ज्ञान दे रहे हैं. So Manish, thank you. I've always known you for being outspoken, so let me start by talking about what you feel about Ghulam Nabi Azad's exit and some of the issues that have been flagged by Mr. Azad. Do you agree with them?
Well, first of all, thank you, Barkha, for having me on your show. This was long overdue.
Yes.
To put it a little mildly. Well, to answer your question off the bat, it is unfortunate, right, when you have colleagues, both senior and junior, deciding to sever ties with an institution that they have served over all these years. I obviously would be in no position to speak about Mr. Azad's letter because that's something which Mr. Azad would be in the best position to contextualize, or for that matter, when he does decide to speak, really spell out the reasons what impelled him to take that particular call. But what I can talk about is the letter which 23 of us had jointly signed 2 years back, essentially flagging the fact that, look, there is a crisis, and there is a crisis not only for the Indian National Congress, but there's a larger crisis which is facing the idea of India. And as you've been saying yourself now for many years to me, that it seems that the ground has been shifting inexorably right. And that was not the essence of India. That was not, or that is not the liberal idea of India, which got encapsulated into the design of the Indian Constitution. And therefore, as people who have grown up with that conception of India, a liberal, pluralistic India, and who do believe that the Indian National Congress remains and still remains the best instrument to check that drift. So, therefore, 24 months back, that was really an attempt to flag those concerns, because essentially, in an electoral democracy, as one of the former prime ministers had said, that it is a numbers game. You need to win elections. You need to have your hands on the levers of power if you really want to make a difference, either ideologically or even from an implementation standpoint, to the lives of millions and millions of people who live in India. And so therefore, that was the entire rationale for flagging those concerns. That look, we need to recognize that there's a problem, and we need to deal with that, and we need to surmount the challenges.
And has that happened?
Well, essentially, if that would have happened, Barkha, we won't have continued Unfortunately, losing election after election. When we wrote that letter in the August of 2020, there have been 10 state elections so far. There was a state election in Bihar in 2020, where if we would have done well, there would have been a government back then. It's another matter that Bihar has flipped now, and you have a government of the Congress, or where the Congress is a constituent. But in 2020, that was not the case. And then you had five elections in 2021, Kerala, which was yours to win because Kerala has always been cyclic. Puducherry, where the Congress has had a historical presence going back to the inception of that union territory and state. Assam, which was again yours to win because there was a lot of anti incumbency on the ground. And West Bengal, where you unfortunately drew a zero. And then you came to 2021 when Uttarakhand, Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, Goa, and Manipur went to the polls. And unfortunately, the same story got repeated in these five elections also. And so, obviously, if the concerns that we had flagged back then in the August of 2020 were incorrect or were superfluous or imbecile for that matter, then the electoral result would have been different in the past 24 months.
You made a statement today where you spoke, and I'm quoting you directly. You said those who have been chaprasis, peons to Congress leaders, are today telling senior Congress leaders to giving Gyan. That's the phrase you used. जो चपरासी हुआ करते थे कांग्रेस लीडरों के, वो आज ज्ञान देंगे. I have to ask you who your reference was to.
Barkha, I'm too old to get into personal stuff. I think that stage and phase of my life is over. It
But you
was a
made the
me-
comment. You
it
made the
was a
comment.
I'm contextualizing it for you. It was a metaphorical statement because day in and day out, you would see people who, frankly, have not really made a place for themselves electorally or otherwise, uh, rubbishing people who have spent a lifetime in the party 40 years, 50 years. And so, therefore, it creates an anguish on a daily basis to see people who've grown up within the party, whose contribution you've respected, whose life journeys you've been aware of, the fact that they have contributed very greatly to building this institution. And when you see people who, frankly, for the lack of a better word, perhaps do not have that gravitas or even that stature, rubbishing them, it hurts you because I have spent 42 years now in the Congress party. And some of those people who signed on that letter along with me are people who've actually spent a longer time in the service of the Indian National Congress. And in fact, have handled situations where even physically their lives were at stake. As someone who cut his political teeth in Punjab during the days of fighting extremism and separatism after my late father got assassinated, you were not very sure when you would go out in the morning whether you would even come back home in the evening. And so, therefore, those were the kind of challenges which you took in your stride because you had this ideological commitment not only to the party but to the Indian nation state also. And then when you find that people who have no recollection of that period, who have no recollection of the immense contribution and personal sacrifices which have been made, just kind of hold forth on a daily basis, and that's what impelled me to really make that statement, not personally aimed at anybody, but in a metaphorical context, essentially to flag that guys, you need to stop this. Before you start rubbishing people uh, whom you do not know, whose contributions you are not aware of. It's high time you got real and perhaps brushed up on your knowledge with regard to those who you seek to vilify and you seek to debase on a daily basis.
Do you feel that the party has been unfair to Ghulam Nabi Azad?
Well, that's a question, Barkha, which Mr. Azad is best placed to answer. I don't think it would be appropriate for either I or anybody else to second guess what Mr. Ghulam Nabi Azad has to say. Suffice to say that when I first came across Mr. Ghulam Nabi Azad, it was way back in 1988 when terrorism was at its peak and when people were scared to really even go out of their homes after 4 p.m. in the evening. And as General Secretary in charge of Punjab, risking his life, and of course, with thousands of other Congress leaders, many of those who unfortunately died or were assassinated during those days, you actually carried out mass contact programs. You waged the political battle against the forces of separatism and extremism. So therefore, when you and that eventually paved the way for a Congress government and for the restoration of democracy in Punjab in 1992. So when you've actually seen people in those avatars, and frankly, for a large number of them, there wasn't really a need to do that because let's not forget the Congress was a party of 415 seats in the Lok Sabha. And people could have been easily ensconced in very comfortable ministerial positions. But a large number of them, and they were young at that point in time, chose to give it up or chose to give it up, primarily to strengthen the great institution which they had belief in.
Let me ask you this. There are certain issues that you raised in that G23 letter. There are certain issues since the Ghulam Nabi Azad has raised. He's spoken about decisions being taken by Rahul Gandhi or worse, his security guards. Today, it has been suggested that that reference was to Mr. K.V. Baiju, who used to be the SPG and is now a core part of the decision-making team. Do you believe the problem is what's being called by those leaving as a cabal and a coterie, or do you believe the problem is the leadership itself? Let me also add here that yours is a party where, in its worst existential crisis, doesn't have a full-time party president.
Well, Barkha, let me answer that as one, two, and three. The first response which I would like to articulate is that, insofar as I'm concerned, it's not about individuals, right? I have no animus. I have no angst against any particular individual or any particular leader. I think I'm a little too far gone for all those biases. What really concerned me or concerns me, which is why I signed on to that letter after seeing that 8 or 10 of our senior colleagues, uh, some of them with whom I had spent a lifetime in the party, had also put their names onto that letter, was essentially to ensure that that ideological construct, which is the idea of India, and which unfortunately after two Lok Sabha defeats in 2014 and 2019 appeared to be rather dull, and which seems to have got duller over the past 3 years, that needed to be rejuvenated and that needed to be revitalized. Because essentially, it is not about power and pelf and it is not about positions. Because had it been about power, pelf, or positions, there was really no need to stick your neck out and, well, be the messenger of bad news or bad tidings. But the fact that people chose to do that, I think, was indicative of a conviction beyond their own selves.
You made the comment today about जो वार्ड इलेक्शन नहीं जीतता वो हमें ज्ञान not हमें you said वो कांग्रेस लीडर्स को ज्ञान दे रहा है. The Congress has turned around and at least said in the context of the Azad exit that he was electorally insignificant. Jairam Ramesh has said that his GNA's DNA has been modified. right? Very Jairam-esque play on letters there. Basically, the upshot charge is that all of you are soft on the BJP. You guys are rebels, you can't win elections, and you're soft on the BJP.
Well, I don't want to make it personal, but the fact is that some of us have actually contested, lost, and won elections, while others have not even chosen to enter the electoral fray. What to talk about actually experiencing the cut and thrust of an election? So, therefore, for somebody to turn around and say that is quite rich because
I mean, that reference
essentially,
is to Mr. Ramesh himself, who's been a sort of Rajya Sabha voice.
well, again, as I said, it's not about a particular individual or a set of individuals. All I'm trying to say is that when you point fingers at somebody, there are three fingers which get pointed back at you. And therefore, rather than try and take everybody along, rather than try and consolidate the forces which are really opposed to this growing vigilantism which this country is witnessing, rather than be cognizant about the complete decapitation of the institutions which has taken place. And you yourself have very passionately written about one particular episode on which I have also written my weekly column, which will come out tomorrow, on Bilkis Bano, right? Rather than uh, be really passionate about those concerns, if the entire idea is finger pointing and to kind of score brownie points against each other, then I ask myself that do these people even do justice to the positions which they occupy?
You have, not spoken much about Rahul Gandhi directly, but there are other leaders who signed on to that letter. Prithviraj Chavan, for example, who have gone on record to speak about how they can't get access to Mr. Gandhi. Um, Javeer Shergill, a young colleague or former colleague of yours, exiting, told me in an interview that he's been trying to meet the Gandhis for the last year and a half, and he has to get an appointment. He can't just call them directly, and he's not been able to meet them. Is that a problem that party leaders are not able to meet with the Gandhis?
Well, as I said, I personally have nothing against Mr. Rahul Gandhi or anybody else for that matter, right? And I have not had any difficulty in accessing the Congress President, Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, whose first political appointee I was way back in 1998. So, therefore, under those circumstances, I think it's if you really dumb it down to access issues, then you are also not clear about what you are fighting about. And as I earlier told you, for me, it's not about individuals or even about certain individuals who possibly may be feeling neglected. Maybe that was their impulse and their driving force, because obviously all 23 people couldn't have been aligned primarily because, on a single point. But insofar as I'm concerned, for me, the concern was that we were at 44 in 2014. We went up to only 52 in 2019. We saw that drift to the right, which only got accentuated as the opposition seemed to be completely and absolutely divided and, for all intents and purposes, even absent when they were required. And and as someone who was a part of an apex institution once told me when I asked him that why have you guys collapsed, and he said that the collapse is not ours, the collapse is really yours, because ultimately if there is going to be only one season and that's going to be summer, then why buy winter clothes? And to me that was a big takeaway, that eventually the balance in the polity is what keeps even the institutions alive and kicking. And once the balance in the polity gets skewed in a particular direction, then everything just heads north. And that's what you've seen happening in this country. And for me, the critical thing, and that's the reason why I kept speaking about it, in spite of the fact that a lot of senior colleagues told me that you are doing this at the peril of your own career. And I ask myself every day, that is my career more important to me? And if that purpose is served by keeping quiet, then why am I in public life in the first place? Because if I am not passionate about issues, if I do not care about this country, I do not care about the direction in which this country is heading, then what am I doing in public life? I mean, I can go back and concentrate full time on my legal profession or do something else.
Are
Right?
you are you are you are you thinking of that?
Well, that's always an option which is available, in the sense that, if you feel that you're not making a difference, there is nothing which stops you from opting out. So therefore, floor crossing is not the option which is not the only option which is available to even full-time politicians. There's enough
Yeah.
that you can otherwise do. So the larger point that I'm trying to make to you is that if you find that the causes that you believe in, or the reasons that impelled you to come into public life in the first place at a very, very young age, those objectives or those issues are not really being given the attention which they deserve, or do not have the kind of energy behind them which is required to fight this good fight, then of course, at the end of the day, you do think that what am I really doing here? And let me tell you, this is not only a concern which is limited to me. If you talk to some of our other colleagues, people who are again passionate about issues, who live in the world of ideas, who believe that politics is not about making a fast buck on the side, they will all tell you the same thing. That
So on those days when you think, what am I doing here? And everybody has some bad days at work. So, but then sometimes there are more bad days than there are good days. So let me just ask you this directly. Are you going to stay in politics? And are you going to stay with the Congress? Or are you going to be added to our long roster list of graphics that we just played, where Manish Tewari will be the next edition of the man leaving the Congress?
Well, I hope I do not become another cipher on your graphic, because I don't think that's the way. That's the way I would like to really end it. And to answer your question straight, Barkha, I have been with the Congress for 42 years. I know that they speculate on a daily basis. Whenever I speak about something which makes people uncomfortable, or is leaving, he's joining the Bharatiya Janata Party, he's joining the Aam Aadmi Party. At times it goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. He's joining the Indian Union Muslim League. But I I I I often think to myself that does everything have to be so petty? Does everything, behind every statement, does there have to be a personal motive, that rather than looking at the message, or rather than trying to decipher the message, you're always trying to shoot the messenger? And ultimately, you're not shooting the messenger, you're actually shooting yourself in both your feet.
So is the Congress party currently shooting itself in both its feet?
Well, I think the challenge that faces the Indian National Congress, and not only the Indian National Congress, but the entire opposition, as well as the institutional integrity of this country, is restoring that balance in 2024. Because, God forbid, if that were not to happen, you would find a lot more Bilkis Bano like instances becoming the norm rather than the exception.
Okay, I have a couple of minutes left. Let me ask you this. When you signed on to that letter as part of the group of 23, you were urging reform within the party. And democracy, internal democracy, is a key part of that reform. Now, we already know that Rahul Gandhi has said no to even contesting for or running for party president. You have strange statements from other party leaders. Mr. Kharge, I think, said we'll force him to be party president. And in the meantime, there is speculation that Ashok Gehlot is the man for the job. In other words, this is already pre-chosen, not really democratically chosen, if this is how it's going to go. Are you concerned about that?
Well, eventually, you will only have an election once you have an electoral roll in place. At this point in time, to the best of my knowledge, there is no electoral roll also which is public. So if I believe that the Congress Working Committee is supposed to meet virtually tomorrow to pin down a schedule. But I think a prerequisite to that schedule is having an electoral role in the first place. I mean, people should know who the electors are, and then whosoever feels that he has it in him or she has it in him to actually fight that fight, they would have a fair chance of getting a shot. Let's not forget the fact, I recall when I was first elected as a member of the AICC Barkha way back in 1991 in Chandigarh, there were actually votes which were polled. PCC members actually polled votes, put them into a ballot box in order to elect us to the All India Congress Committee. I remember 1992 Tirupati also, where an election to the Congress Working Committee was held. It's another matter that Mr. Narasimha Rao later chose to scrap that election and nominate all the people who had got elected. I do remember 1997 also, when Sitaram Kesari was challenged by Rajesh Pilot and by Sharad Pawar. And I remember the election in Calcutta at the Calcutta session of the Congress, where people got elected to the working committee against the official panel, which was declared by the then president, Mr. Sitaram Kesari. And I also do remember the first election of Congress President Mrs. Sonia Gandhi when Mr. Jitendra Prasad challenged her. So
And
therefore,
I remember some of these elections as well, having been also of a certain vintage in journalism. My question is, when you see today the headlines about Mr. Ashok Gehlot, presently Chief Minister of Rajasthan, it sounds like this is now a predetermined choice for president, not an honest, open, transparent election. How do you feel about that?
well, I think that's why I said that the first prerequisite to any such process is to have an electoral roll, right, which lists out the electors in the public space. And how do you expect anybody to make up their mind whether he or she would like to fight when they do not even know what the composition of the electoral college is? When we go to fight a parliament election, right, there is an electoral roll already in the public space 3 or 4 months before that particular election takes place, right? You do actually study that electoral roll, you draw up your strategy, and then you go into battle. So therefore, even to ask someone that, are you willing to contest, would you take the plunge? Well, I do not even know who my electors are. So
Yeah.
how do you expect me to really make up my mind one way or the other, or for that matter, anybody else make up their mind one way or the other?
A lot of attention was placed on your remarks when you broke ranks with the party to take a different position on the Agnipath military recruitment scheme. Uh, I know you follow strategic affairs very closely. What made you break ranks with your party on the Agnipath issue?
Well, let me say the unsaid bit of it, that when I broke ranks, there were a lot of friends of mine, quote unquote, in the party who said that he is joining the Bharatiya Janata Party tomorrow. See, eventually, let me explain it to you as you follow
Yeah.
strategic affairs, and these are the questions which I asked the defense minister and the army chief, even in the consultative committee meeting of defense. You see, in my estimation, the whole Agnipath scheme is really about right sizing the Indian army, which is the largest employer outside, because the Navy and the Air Force really employ very less people. They are capital intensive, technology heavy in a relative sense of the word. And so therefore, if you look at the average size of land forces anywhere in the world, the US Army is at about 450,000. Even the PLA is down to a million people. Russia, which is currently fighting in Ukraine, is 285,000, and they've had to call up reservists, and I can go on and on, but you don't have
Yeah.
that much of time. So therefore, I think there is a need to right size the Indian army, bring it down from 1.4 million to about a million, which is exactly what this Agnipath scheme intends to do. It's another matter that the government is not being upfront about it. If you look at it from the year 2000 to 2022, on an average, we've been recruiting about 62,000 people every year, right? And if you want to right size, you really need to recruit about 15,000. The government could have been very upfront and could have said that, look, we are carrying out these defense reforms, we are modernizing, we are bringing in theater commands, we are reorganizing the entire structure of the armed forces, but they chose to go about it in a circuitous way. But notwithstanding that, I think the time has come when you need to move from the very heavy footprint that you have to a lighter footprint, which is technology enabled. And that's why I said, and a lot of people did not like it when I said this, that the armed forces of the Union are not an employment guarantee program. The armed forces of the Union have a certain remit, and in the informationized 21st century warfare paradigm that we are entering, and especially the kind of adversaries we face, we require a nimbler army, we require a nimbler armed force, but which is much better equipped. And coupled with that is, of course, that if you look at the armed forces, a bulk of their money is going towards pensions and salaries. Where is the money for capital expenditure and modernization? Every standing committee of defense from 2010 onwards has been flagging it. Defense expenditure as a part of GDP, has been declining continuously. In 2019, it was at the same level as it was in 1962 when we fought the war with China. So therefore, on certain issues, you need to rise above parties and politics and try and see why and where this is headed. And in my estimation, that this particular scheme, even though the government could have been, as I said, a little more truthful about it, at the end of the day is something which strategically India requires. And that's why I
Okay.
broke rank.
We'll have a separate debate one day on Agnipath. It needs a longer and more complex conversation, especially with the new militarized zone opening up in eastern Ladakh. Let me close with a political question again. If you look at some of those leaders that you came together with to raise the flag for reform within the party, Ghulam Nabi Azad has left. Kapil Sibal has joined another party. Anand Sharma has resigned from his party post, right? Prithviraj Chavan, I don't know. He says he hasn't met Rahul Gandhi in several months. There's you who's being quite cryptic about your next steps. If I had to ask you today, are you hopeful about change in the Congress? Are you hopeful at all? You
Well,
would say what?
let me answer your question straight. Some of these colleagues who unfortunately left,
And can I
possibly,
add your own? Can I also add two colleagues of yours in Punjab, Captain Amrinder Singh, whom you were known to be very close to, and Sunil
and I
Jakhar,
still am, and I still am.
and you're still very close to Captain Amrinder,
Still am, and I'm still am. So yeah,
and
I don't change my relationships depending upon whether a person is in power or out of power. So that's not the
okay.
way I have been built. So therefore, I had respect for him. I have respect for him, and I will continue to have the deepest respect for him. I don't change relationships, depending on whether a person is chief minister or not. But to answer your earlier question, Barkha, uh, perhaps they got despondent. Perhaps they felt that this was a lost cause. Perhaps they felt that they were banging their head against a blank wall. But eventually, I do feel that if the idea of India, which all of us believe in, people who have a far more permissive and a liberal view of how this country needs to be structured, there is no alternative but to keep persevering. And I will try and keep persevering as long as I can. And I just do hope to God that I don't have to give up.
Well, let's see. As they say, watch this space. It's a cliche, but I mean, it's so true for the Congress party. I'm glad we were finally able to do a long overdue interview, Manish. Thank you. Take care and
Thank
talk
you very
soon.
much, Barkha, and my apologies that we had been sort of, going around in circles. But it's always a pleasure talking to the best anchor still in the broadcast space. My
Thank you.
my best wishes to you and the kind of journalism you do and the yeoman work that you did, especially during the pandemic when nobody was even stirring out. You went across this country, the length and breadth of this country. You lost your own father to that pandemic, and despite that, you brought us all those stories, which were really heartbreaking. Congratulations to you.
Thank you, Manish. Take care and thanks for talking to us. Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.